Good morning, Keith Tebow with you here on FRC Media. We're getting set for the September 6th primary election here in Massachusetts, and we're doing our best to speak to as many candidates as possible to make sure you will make informed choices at the ballot box. This morning, I am pleased to be joined by Tanisha Sullivan. Tanisha is running for Secretary of State on the Democratic side, on the Democratic primary on September 6th. Tanisha, thank you for joining me. How are you?
Thank you so much, Keith, for having me. Fantastic morning. How are you?
I'm great, and thank you for spending some time to speak to the voters of Fall River. My first question, and I do this quite often, especially with the statewide candidates I've had the opportunity to speak with. Unless the candidate is from a specific location, obviously people may not know a lot about who's running. So tell us a little about Tanisha Sullivan and why you want to run for Secretary of State.
Thank you so much again. Well, it's good to have the opportunity to connect with residents of Fall River. I actually grew up right up 24 in Brockton. Spent most of my life in the city of Champions, the daughter of a public school educator and a small business owner. I am now I can't believe it, it's in my 20th year of legal practice. I've been practicing now for quite some time, but I've also along the way had the opportunity to, of course, serve our communities. I worked in the Boston Public Schools as its chief equity officer, and I am actively involved in a number of community-based organizations, including the NAACP, of which I'm the volunteer president here in Boston, where I now live. I really do believe that at this critical point in our democracy, where so many families, so many people are feeling deep concern about the state of our democracy, deep concern about voting rights in our elections, and yes, our economy, that this office of Secretary of State has to become a better community member, has to really lean in and champion the issues of our democracy, including us having safe and secure elections, and also ensuring that folks who have the right to vote actually have access to the ballot box. But equally so, the Secretary of State's office has an important role to play in helping to stabilize our economy. It is the entry point for business. And I believe that this office should be doing more to support our small business community, which, as I know many are aware, small businesses are truly the backbone of so many communities like Fall River. But right now, coming through the pandemic, they are the ones that have been hit, quite frankly, the hardest at this very difficult time. And so I'd like to see the Secretary of State's office do more to provide supports to these businesses.
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. You mentioned about your connections to Brockton. So obviously you're aware of the gateway cities, Brockton being one, Fall River, New Bedford, and our part of the neck of the woods. If you can just expand a little bit on how, cities like Fall River can benefit from what you'd like to accomplish. You talked about, I want to get into, your issues on expanding voting rights. I know that's probably one of your biggest platforms in running, but, talk a little bit about how gateway cities and maybe Fall River and the South Coast can benefit from those initiatives.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, when we talk about voting rights, I think it's important for us to acknowledge as a Commonwealth that we've got deep voter participation gaps, low voter participation rates that are hitting communities across the Commonwealth, but really hitting hard our gateway cities like Fall River, New Bedford, and Brockton. And I believe that the Secretary of State's office should be more concerned about these low voter participation rates, and as such should be doing more to support our local communities, our local elections officials and town clerks, our local community-based organizations and elected officials to really help increase voter participation rates. And I believe there are two things that we need to be doing in that space. One, we must continue to break down administrative barriers to the ballot box that keep people from being able to exercise their vote free and clear. But we also have to deal with the very real issue of distrust and mistrust that so many people have with government. When we think about our gateway cities are home to many people of color, to working people, to low income folks. And in many of those communities, there is a fractured relationship with government. And if we are going to inspire, encourage, and motivate people in our gateway cities to actually cast their ballot and to believe that that vote is going to count, government, I believe the Secretary of State's office has to do a better job at connecting with those communities, connecting with local municipalities to build trust and to strengthen relationships that can then lead folks to get to that ballot box. It's really important that we're doing both the
Mm.
administrative pieces and the human connection pieces. That's what's missing today from our Secretary of State's office on with respect to voter participation. With respect to the economy, a lot of people don't know that in addition to this office being the chief elections office for Massachusetts, it's also the entry point for business. So this is the office through its corporations division, where if you are a business owner, you have to register, you have to file annual reports, and you've got to pay fees to the Secretary of State's office. Most people don't realize that Massachusetts is the most expensive state in the country to start a business. And in the fees that are paid to the Secretary of State's office are the same, whether you're the small micro Main Street business, the owner operated one like my mom's, or you are a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I don't think that's fair. And so I believe that the Secretary of State's office should have more support for our small businesses, that the Secretary of State's office should be looking to reduce fees for small business owners, and should be a better partner in connecting small business owners, again, especially the ones like my mom's, the owner
Mhm.
operated small businesses, to the resources they need to be successful. The reason that's important, Keith, is because we know that families across Massachusetts are deeply concerned about economic stability. And small businesses are the backbone of our economy. And so the Secretary of State's office must take greater responsibility for being of better service to those businesses so that they're not going out of business, but actually thriving in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, I want to get back, I get some follow-up questions on the voting side and also on what you just said about the business side. But on the voting side, the legislature passed the Votes Act this year, which expands opportunities for people to vote, early voting, voting by mail. Um, I believe you have been supportive of same-day voter registration. That is not in the bill. I guess my question is, there's a lot that's already being done. Is that last piece maybe the voter registration, as well as communicating, getting people to trust, if you will, their government and their
Mhm.
ability to vote?
Mm. Yes, I am pleased that the legislature passed and the governor signed the Votes Act, which of course includes extended early voting periods now during the primary, shortens the registration deadline for voters, and it also, for the first time, makes permanent vote by mail. Vote by mail is actually a voting flexibility that states started adopting back in the 80s. So it has been quite some time for Massachusetts to finally get permanent vote by mail. And so I am pleased that our legislature got that done. That said, there was a big reform that was left out of the Votes Act, and that is same day voter registration or election day voter registration. And I think that's a big miss. In fact, the research tells us that when it comes to tackling voter participation rates, when it comes to increasing voter participation, same day or election day registration is one of the most important administrative barriers for states to take down. Same day or election day registration can and will help to increase voter participation rates in gateway cities among our communities of color, working people, and low income folks. This is a really important voting right, and I intend to continue to fight for it, and to continue to look for ways to advance this right. You know, I'm a civil rights leader, and I know that there is no greater issue in our country today, in our democracy today, than the fight to protect and advance voting rights and ensure that we have safe and secure elections. And I will continue to be a fighter in that regard, and work with the legislature to get it done, but also work in partnership with our voting rights community, and with our local elections officials and with our community stakeholders.
Speaking of these changes in the Votes Act and what you're bringing up, a lot of times those on the other side of the aisle, in terms of on the Republican side, will question these. But a lot of these same issues would benefit any voter, right, regardless of their party affiliation, which sometimes I think isn't talked about enough.
I agree. I mean, look, I think it's really important for folks to know that for me, this is about voting rights for the American people and voting rights within our communities. And it that has no political designation. That is about ensuring that those who have the right to vote actually can decide to exercise that vote whenever they choose to do so. You know, an important data point for folks on this too is that Maine adopted same day voter registration or election day voter registration in 1973. We're talking about nearly a half century ago. And since that time, 20 other states have followed suit, including all of our surrounding New England states. This particular voting flexibility, this particular administrative barrier requiring people who have the right to vote to register by a specific date, this particular voting right, this particular administrative flexibility, same day or election day registration, would ensure that if someone, a voter, has the right to vote, that they are not limited from exercising that right because of an administrative barrier like a registration deadline. I believe that that is critically important in the American democracy. And it's a fight,
Right.
as I said, that I look forward to continuing.
Yeah. Um, you're going up against in the primary Bill Galvin, who has been Secretary of State for quite some time, and you're the only candidate who's running against an incumbent directly in this race. And I know a lot of what the current Secretary of State has said in the past kind of mimics a lot of what you're saying. So I guess, how can you differentiate between him? Is it approach and tone? Because on many of the issues, there is some agreement.
Actually, I disagree with what
Okay.
you've just described. We are as probably as far apart when it comes to our view of this office as a Democrat could get from another Democrat.
Mhm.
I actually believe that this office needs to make some fundamental changes. I believe that this office cannot continue to operate as it has for the last almost 3 decades, because our democracy has evolved, our communities have evolved, and therefore the needs of this office have evolved. This office can no longer continue to be an administrative hub, a transactional hub, only concerned with whether people can register to vote. This office must be deeply concerned with whether folks are coming out to vote and actually casting their ballots. And so I believe that this office must be more proactive, it must be more engaged, it must be more visible, present in our communities. It has to be a better community member. Historically, this office has been viewed as a sideline player in our democracy. I believe in 2022, that can no longer be the case. We are watching our nation really wrestle with an ideological civil war. We are watching families and people feel so disconnected from our democracy, questioning whether our democracy is even working anymore. The Secretary of State's office is the chief democracy office here in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. At this critical point in time, it must be present. It cannot continue to be a reactive office. And so I absolutely intend to build on what has been done, but to take this office in a different direction so that it can not only meet this moment in our democracy and restore hope and faith in our democracy, but be prepared to help take the Massachusetts democracy into the future and serve as a beacon for the rest of the nation while it's doing so.
Yeah. That gets to another role that the Secretary of State's office takes part in. That's the keeper of the records, if you will, right? There's a lot of public information there. Transparency has always been a question on all levels of government. Is this something as well in terms of making the state a better supporter of democracy, that you feel that you can do a better job in terms of not only managing the records, but allow people to get access to those records?
Absolutely. The incumbent has been in office for over 27 years. And during that time, Massachusetts has remained the least transparent state in the country. So now, again, in addition to being the most expensive state in the country to start a business, in addition to being woefully behind when it comes to the advancement of voting rights, Massachusetts is the least transparent state in the country. The Secretary of State is the chief information officer. The issue here is that this office historically has not taken an active role in helping to increase the transparency of our state government. It has worked the edges. I believe that public information actually belongs to the public. I believe that public policy should be debated in the public square. So, yes, the public deserves access to information so we can hold our government accountable. But the public, we the people, also need access to public information so that we can participate in governing. And the Secretary of State's office has to be a frontline advocate for the people when it comes to accessing public information. And unfortunately, that has not been the case. As Secretary of State, I will not only work to increase the transparency in our state government through further reforms of our public records law, but I am also going to work to ensure that as it relates to the implementation of the law today, that government is not unduly denying access to public information to the people. And also, I will work to ensure that government is not assessing excessive fees to access public information. This is a very important issue and one that impacts so many communities across the Commonwealth.
And I would think this is again your vision of being more proactive instead of reactive, correct? Right?
Indeed.
Yeah. Um, you know, how do you lend your experience? You mentioned you're the volunteer president of the NAACP and your other civic work, as a chief equity officer in the public schools in Boston. Um, is that something that is that you feel that will help in terms of being more proactive? Because again, there's your life experiences that, quite honestly, someone like me, white
Yeah.
male, may not have experienced, that can help shed light for all of us in this role.
Absolutely. And, Keith, I think it's really important to note again, I'm certainly a practicing attorney, and a transactional attorney. And so I understand, the nuts and bolts of administrating. But I am a civil rights leader. I am an active community member. And yes, I'm a Black woman. And I do believe that at this particular moment in our democracy, all three of those qualities and qualifications do give me a different perspective on this office from a leadership standpoint, and have prepared me in a very unique way to lead in this moment, to have an understanding, yes, of how critically important it is for us to focus on voter registration, but at the same time, how critically important it is for us to focus on the relationship piece as between the people and our government, when it comes to truly advancing voter participation and voting rights. It is. This is a very challenging time in our democracy. And again, it is one where so many people and families are just wondering if we're going to make it through what truly does feel like an ideological civil war. We are so deeply polarized politically. Congress can't get anything done. The Supreme Court has taken a hard turn to become more politicized. And what we need right now in our government are leaders who are not politicians, but public servants. We need leaders in our government who come into the space with the experience of the people, in centering the people in all of our policy making versus elected officials who are focused on really advancing powerful interests.
Mm.
And so for me, someone who's, this is my first time running for elected office, but it is certainly not my first time engaging in our political ecosystem. For someone like me to really step up in this moment and say, I want to be of service. I want to serve our communities. I want to serve our Commonwealth. And I want to bring into this role certainly my qualifications, my solid qualifications from a legal standpoint, but I also want to bring into this role the experiences I've had working in our communities, with our communities, to really help meet the needs of everyday people.
I appreciate your time, Tanisha. I'm going to give you about another minute now to speak directly to the people of Fall River, especially those Democrats who are going to
Mhm.
be voting on September 6th, and why they should support you.
Thank you so much. Again, it's great to be back in the Fall River neighborhood. September 6th is the Democratic primary. I am honored to be the endorsed Democrat in this race. I received 62.4% of the vote at the Massachusetts Democratic Convention. So I am the endorsed Democrat in this race, and I thank all of you who supported me. But now we have a primary that we need to win. September 6th is the final day to cast your ballot. Certainly between now and then, you can vote by mail. And you can early vote starting August 27th. But I'm asking for your vote. I'm asking for your vote with the belief that in this moment, we need more from our government. We need more from the Secretary of State's office. We cannot continue to have an office that is reactive to what is happening around us. In this moment, we need an office that is not only proactive and engaged, but an office that is going to be seeking opportunities to help families and help residents across Massachusetts really experience a positive quality of life in this office, the Chief Elections Office, the Chief Information Office. And as I shared, the entry point for business and helping to stabilize our economy has an important role to play in all of that. So I do ask for your vote. Please visit my website, TanishaSullivan.com, if you'd like to learn more about our campaign, if you'd like to volunteer. Thank you so much. And again, September 6th is the date for this election. And if you are a Democrat, you can vote for me. And if you're unenrolled, like many voters here in Massachusetts, you can pull a Democratic ballot and you can vote Tanisha Sullivan for Secretary of State.
All right, Tanisha Sullivan, Democrat, running for Secretary of State. Thank you for joining me. Thank you to speaking to the people of Fall River. And I'm saying this to all the candidates running in September. I look forward to speaking to you again when you win the primary before the general election. So I look forward to that conversation as well. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
All right. And thank you for joining us as well here in FRC Media. I'm Keith Tebow. Have a great day.